So for the cyclic theory of change, we were discussing about how this understanding of change is helping us to create more uh, sustainable solutions. So first, what can we change? And it's important to discuss what we can change because sometimes we pretend to create solutions to things that are not in our control. And for that, we must understand this first thing. There are some things that I like to call the spheres of power. There's a person, and that person has like these first circle of control. You could say circles of power. This circle of control includes all the things that we can change directly, and all the things that are in our in our grasp to change. That means things that are in our direct power. When we have this clear, we can start making things and solutions from what we have in our hands. This includes our purpose. We can change our purpose. We have a control over our choices. We have control over our actions, and we have control over our responses. So pretty much the only thing we can change, or the only thing we really have control upon, is ourselves, our purpose, our choices, our actions, our responses, the way we see things, the way we react. Whatever is in our direct control, that's it, which is pretty much ourselves. Then there's the second circle, which is the circle of influence. Now it's interesting, the circle of influence, because we usually think that we can change others and other things that are not in our circle of control. But there's this circle of influence in which we can find the people that can be inspired by us, but we cannot change them directly. Not even our family. Our family is part of that circle of influence. Our students, our colleagues, our neighbors, the things that are around us. Now, in this case, for example, our circle of influence can be bigger or smaller depending on what we do. As teachers, we have a very wide circle of influence, and you can even divide this circle into other circles, like there's this direct influence circles and then this indirect influence circle. Talking about, for example, we can influence our students directly, and then we can influence the families indirectly by our actions. But this is related to being inspirational, to being also something that students can rely on or connect to, into understanding, into the comprehension that we can create for them to change. So we can inspire them to change in their own circle of control. I'm not okay. So in that sense, this is the second circle, the circle of influence. And obviously, when we talk about, for example, YouTube influencers, they have a very big circle of influence. So also this is important because media, social networks, or Instagram or Facebook, or for example, news anchors, they have a very big circle of influence too. So we have to be conscious about our circle of influence, and what's our reach, that we can inspire, or we can inform, or we can share possibilities to others. But we cannot make them change. The change has to be a decision of their own. It has to be a choice for them. So that's why we only influence on them. We don't control that, right? And when we're clear with that, we understand that our power for making changes, for creating solutions and stuff, include only our circle of control and the possibilities that we can create to influence others. But there is also this last circle, which is a circle of consideration. And in that sense, the circle of consideration implies the things or includes the things that we need to take into consideration whenever we think we are going to change something. These are the things that depend on the complexity of the world. These are things that are part of the system that we are part of, but not necessarily are in our circle of control or influence. Things that are there. Climate change, for example, it's not that we can make a solution on climate change. It's that we can do some things in our own lives and we can create some influence in others so that climate change changes by itself. But in that sense, it's not something that we cannot change things directly. So the things that depend on the complexity of the world are the community, the government, the market, sustainability. And in that sense, for example, what is it? There are things in the circle of consideration that are connected to our sphere of control, which is, for example, our choice. Whenever we vote, we are choosing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the change in the government is going to be as we want it, because it depends on the complexity of the system, on the others, on the other voters, on the powers that are moving there. So in that sense, what the sphere of consideration is important for us here is that um, it gives us a connection to our control, to our sphere of control through ethical principles. What do we need to take out from the sphere of from the circle of consideration? Those ethical principles. And that means if we want if we want a stronger community, then we have to change ourselves first into what a stronger community individual or an individual in a stronger community should be doing. If we want a more powerful government, a transparent government, then we have to do what transparency requires in our sphere of control, our own finances, our own lives, and our taxes and stuff like that. Market is the same. Market depends on individual choices, on the sphere of control of the others. But market is something in the system that is influencing our choices. So when we are conscious about it, we can do some ethical choices about our consumption and then um, change the market. So when we want to change the things that are into the sphere of consideration, it's not something, it's not that we have the power to create something that changes directly, that changes that directly. We create things in our spheres of control and influence that can little by little change that. And that's why we talk about cycles sometimes. Um, and cycles are like this. I'm going to use this example that we talked about when we were in session. It's a cycle that starts with identifying a little situation. Now, the theory of change usually is something very linear. It's setting the objectives, identifying the resources that we need to achieve those objectives, then identifying the products that we are going to create with these resources regarding these objectives, and then identifying the results that we want to get with this. So if I set the objectives, then I choose the resources and the products that I need to create the results that I want, and then measure impact or be able to create an impact. That is pretty much what theory of change is. But the cyclic theory of change is not based on results or impact, and it's considering the nature of the systems that we are related to or immersed in. So in this sense, we are going to start on, by identifying an undesired situation, and the undesired situation that we identify has a cause and a consequence. Everything has a reason to happen and a consequence for that. In this case, the feedback result is what comes after this undesired situation. And then it's going to connect in a way that if something happens in the undesired situation, then the feedback will happen this way, and so on. And we create a cycle. Now, these feedback results or these little nodes, each of them can be an undesired situation in its own. And it's going to be connected as a cause and a consequence to the previous one, and so on. So you have an undesired situation that is going to reinforce this result, and this result is going to become the undesired situation that's going to feed the other result, and so on. So in that sense, in the cyclic theory of change, what we need to identify is that there are nodes that are in our sphere of control or in our sphere of influence, which means what can I do that can change one of these nodes that unleashes the change in the whole cycle. So I create a strategy. To create a strategy, you have many different methodologies, but the idea is you create a strategy so you can change one of these many undesired situations or results, and then that is going to provoke a change in the next one, in the other nodes in the cycle. Let's put it in an example. You're going to, well, you make your strategy, you create an intermediate result, that intermediate result changes the next one, and then that changes that undesired situation, creating a desired situation, and that gives us desired feedback results, and so on, and the cycle changes. Okay, so that the first node we worked on becomes a reinforcing result, and then reinforcing the next one, and so on. So the more cycles that the more cycles we run, the better results we're going to get. And that's the idea of reinforcing loops. We are going to be having these changes constantly reinforcing themselves. And little by little, the scale is going to be stronger. The change is going to be more sustainable. The idea of thinking in cycles and thinking in systems is that we can create more sustainable solutions to what we have through strategies. And then that we can also find the node that is going to give us the most impact with the less energy, or the less effort. Let's put it up in an example here. We had this discussion in the session. Juanito can stop disrupting the class. He's always disrupting the class. So Juanito is sent to the direction because he's always disrupting the class. So Juanito can stop disrupting the class. So so Juanito is sent to the direction. Juanito is sent to the direction. So in the direction, Juanito is asked to apologize. Because of that, Juanito apologizes and then he gets a lollipop. So because of that, Juanito never learns the consequences. And as Juanito never learns the consequences, because of Juanito never learning the consequences, he can stop disrupting the class. Well, this is a cycle. Now, we are not naming anything else, because if the problem is that Juanito probably has ADHD or something like that, then we need to make another cycle. But this is just a cycle about the reinforcing of Juanito's conduct through giving him a lollipop just for apologizing. So in that sense, we can create, there are nodes that are in our control. As teachers, you choose to send Juanito to send Juanito to the direction. So you can also help in your circle of influence. You can also help Juanito learn the consequences. So there are two strategies that we can change in this cycle. The first one is patiently apply positive discipline principles instead of sending Juanito to the direction. And the second strategy, set clear discipline principles and consequences system and make agreements with the class. And that's something that no, doesn't necessarily have to happen in this cycle. It has to be part of the system. So Juanito learns the consequences of his actions. Let's suppose we do that. We set clear principles, discipline principles and consequences system, and make agreements with the class. So Juanito is aware of the consequences. So Juanito may think about the consequences before disrupting the class. But if he disrupts, then we apply patiently positive discipline principles. So Juanito stays in the class and talks with the teacher and students about the disruption. When this happens, Juanito faces the consequences agreed. He's not sent to the direction to apologize. He faces the consequences agreed. When Juanito faces the consequences agreed, he doesn't get a lollipop, and so he's not wrongly rewarded. So Juanito becomes more aware of the consequences. So Juanito then thinks about the consequences before disrupting the class. So Juanito stays in the class and keeps on learning. And because of that, then Juanito becomes part of the learning community in the class. Juanito, as part of the learning community in the class, then is rewarded with personal growth. And so Juanito is aware of his actions and consequences, and so on. So, considering this, what other situations could you change this way? Now, think about it, and let's see if we can do this cyclic theory of change for other situations. Great. Thank you.